CIO of the U.S. Army. So please join me in welcoming Lieutenant General Sorenson. Welcome to Web 2.
Thank you. Thank you.
The stage is yours.
Well, good morning. How are you? Hello? Anybody out there? All right. All right. I got everybody started doing some push-ups here. Wake you up. Look, it's really an opportunity here to come talk to you about your Army. I walked in today and John says, geez, what are you dressed up like that for? Why aren't you wearing the fancy uniform? And I told him, I said, our previous Chief of Staff, soon after 9/11 when we had issues with a lot of soldiers deployed, he says, I want everybody that works in the Army on an everyday basis to wear their battle dress uniform. If nothing else, to remind everybody that today in your Army, you got about 250,000 soldiers deployed all across the globe. We're not counting about the Marines, we're not talking to sailors, we're not talking airmen. So that's why I'm showing up like this today. So anyway, I've got a couple charts here I'm going to walk through, kind of talk to you about what we're doing, talk to you about how we're using some of these technologies, and maybe give you some ideas about what some future needs might be and see what your ideas are. So this is kind of the agenda. They gave me 20 minutes to kind of talk, and I've got a clock here, so I'm going to keep on track. But this is it. Talk to you a little bit. Some of our dilemma. We can't, in many cases, take advantage of all this technology just because of issues we have with the scope and scale of the Army, as well as some of the security issues we have. Talk a little bit about what we're doing with Web 2.0, and then some conclusions there. So I put this up because this is a chart not to say that this is the strategy for the U.S. Army, but it begins to define the strategic environment that I think the Army and the nation will find itself in for some years in the future. And the whole thing is focused here on these trends that take place here, this notion of globalization, what's taking place in terms of not only what's advancing in many cases countries into basic major markets, i.e. China, India, in some cases Bangladesh and so forth, but this notion of resource competition that we're all after, trying to get the same resource, not only the physical resource, but also the personal resource, you know, the brain power and so forth. Continue to monitor a number of terrorist cells with respect to what's taking place in terms of getting at either chemical, biological, and in many cases, this particular audience, cyber-type capabilities. This whole notion of climate change, where we're seeing disasters continual around the world, not only in the United States, and this whole thing about demographics, where there's this burgeoning trend of youth in the Middle East, and what is that going to portend for the future. And so all this is trying to say is that as we build our Army for the future, that we have to think many times in years in the future, trying to figure out what we need to build, to what type of capabilities it's going to have to deploy. So these are going to basically be the trends that are going to define that. So let me talk to you a little bit here about how we get at trying to evolve technology. And this is, in many cases, our dilemma. So you have capabilities here and time over here. And our dilemma is that as we get the generations, you know, you put out something in terms of a new capability. In many cases, it takes us some time before we get into the development phase. We figure out how we could use that and then begin to deploy it. And by the time we get to the point that we're actually using it, oh, by the way, there's a new generation that's come down the line. And so we continue to play out a little bit of delay in trying to put in capability over time. And this just continues to evolve itself as we do this. And the point being here, those results, essentially, let me back up here. Those results, in many cases, take time to keep up with that technology. Okay, let me give you an example of what I mean by this. So this is what it means. We've sort of laid out what the future looks like, going back some years, all the way back to laying out, okay, what we were beginning to develop called the mobile subscriber equipment, a terrestrial-based capability to improve communications. Where I first came in getting some involvement, which was ASAS, a program, All Source Analysis System, an intelligence fusion program, going into the use of GPS during Desert Storm, tactical internet, what we're doing today, but looking at all the types of operations and then beginning as well to put on the bottom what has taken place in the commercial world. You go back to Moore's Law, you get back to development of Cisco, Google, and so forth, and how that has continued to forge essentially what we need. But again, if I get back to sort of displaying what this looks like and how we've been able to take advantage of it, here we were back with the internet back in the early 80s, mid 80s, But in terms of the Army being able to deploy it in terms of a capability, it was a number of years later. In the same context, we get into the Web 1.0 in terms of the ability that it's being used in the commercial market to the point that we start delivering web services and digitizing our capability to use it in combat in terms of operations. And so here we are with respect to Web 2.0, and that's coming in, as Tim O'Reilly says, the ability to put applications out and allow people to develop and improve them the more that they use it. And we're right now trying to get into this kind of capability. And I'll show you some of what we're doing today to give you an idea and a sense of what we're doing. So let me kind of come back. This is something you probably don't see driving down the streets of San Francisco. But this is what we call the Stryker Brigade, the Stryker capability. It's a family of systems. It talks about variants right here, 11 different configurations. It's lighter than our typical, if you will, armor capabilities that we built early on in the 80s. And it gives us the capability to also deploy it very quickly, as well as has been the future for what the Army is about to deploy, called the Future Combat System. And so as an example, this is where, and there's not very many of these, there's only going to be 7 brigades in the entire Army, 7. And that basically is 1/10 of your Army formations, okay? And essentially you can see today we got 1 up here in Alaska, 1 here in Hawaii, 3 up at Fort Lewis, 1 in Pennsylvania, and 1 in Germany. The reason they're down here, we got 2 right now deployed. 2 of those are right now deployed into Iraq. But let me give you a sense of kind of what takes place here. So trying to make sure all these particular organizations can talk to each other because they're globally dispersed. They essentially are not near each other, other than Fort Lewis, where you have 3 of them basically sitting next to each other. So they have to figure out how do they train, how do they fight, how do they use their capabilities, and how they use their systems. So we set up what is known as the Battle Command Knowledge Management System. And in essence, what they do on a daily basis, they use these to essentially talk back to each other, explain what's going on, trade video, trade emails, chat, etc., trying to keep track of what each one of them is doing to try to figure out how can we continue to improve all of them at the same time. Let me give you a couple of demonstrations here. This is the core command.
I want to just close out by telling you this process is important. It can't be understated. The Stryker Brigade community remains the most tightly connected community with the Army today in terms of the interaction of its leaders. And I believe this connectedness is vital to the promotion of rapid learning and the way we're going to learn in the future, and not just within each of your brigades, but throughout the Army.
So that was the Corps commander speaking, talking about how this capability is being used. And these are the sergeant majors.
Communications that you have, and I'll say the best piece of kit that we have for communications, even though it's not for the Stryker vehicles, it's for the brigade, and that's the Harris line of sight. If you're getting ready to come over here and don't have Harris line of sight, that would be my #1 thing that I've got in order to have SIPR connectivity at a usable level down at the company level, and you need that.
So they were doing up there, you saw a different chat, who was on, who was talking. He's trying to tell everybody that this type of new radio capability that just got deployed, they need to go back and acquire it because they're beginning to use it there in Iraq. It's becoming one of the mainstreams in terms of helping increase the amount of bandwidth so they can begin to exchange information and so forth. And so what you saw there was a demonstration of how these brigade combat teams are essentially using, if you will, Web 2.0 technologies to collaborate and exchange information to better improve what their needs are. This is an example of what we're using today in Iraq called Command Post of the Future. And this is a tool that has been built over the last few years to sort of bring in a lot of Web 2.0 capabilities in terms of chat, video, etc. It replaces the previous battle command systems called the Army Battle Command Systems, which was a series of intel, fires, maneuver, and so forth. When I spoke to you earlier back in the mid-'80s, that all-source analysis system, ASAS, that was a program I worked on. But the issue there was you got a functional database, and you had a maneuver functional database, you had a fires functional database, et cetera, et cetera. None of them could collaborate into the field. In fact, if you put a set of coordinates into all those systems and each one popped it up on their screen, one set of coordinates would look like a circle, the other one looked like a square, the other one looked like an arrow. You couldn't really tell it was the same target. So we began to work, this came out of DARPA, where a number of guys got together and began to improve from a collaboration standpoint a dispersed situational awareness tool so that everybody would have the same common operating picture. Everybody could see what was going on throughout that entire country. It gives, as I said, the common operational picture. It is collaborate with MAP, with VoIP. We also have a whiteboard capability. And also gives better situational awareness. This is what it looks like deployed in theater. Okay, it comes in a series of 3 screens. Basically, the one screen here provides the 3D picture, gives you the ability to maneuver it to figure out what you want to go look at any point in time. The chart here in the middle is essentially, we call it the pasteboard. We're allowed to put the friendly situation as well as the enemy situation. All that data begins to populate. And then over here, you essentially have your shared pasteboard where they can begin to make changes in terms of operational orders and so forth. So in many cases, those of you, I don't know if I can't quite see all in the audience, but if you've served in the Army, some years have passed, but I suspect a lot of here is kind of the youth, not the older age, not the digital dinosaurs, so to speak. So you may not remember, but all the orders used to be nothing but paper, or they've been doing it on a radio or something of that nature. Today, this gets transmitted instantaneously in terms of changes. And what I want to do is kind of walk through some of that and show you how this happens. So here we'll talk a little bit about the whiteboard and the VoIP collaboration. I think we're getting that next. Well, let me go back here. I don't know if that showed up. Okay, well, if it doesn't show up, then we'll just kind of continue. It also talks about the use of the pen, being able to, okay, so here we got a whiteboard here, and essentially you show right here, he can use those tools to kind of say, that's an area of interest. That's something that I want to see. I want to know what's going on there. I want to know everything that's going on. So he basically comes back and he says, I can pull up any sort of targeting kind of capabilities, any sort of incident that happened there, and get the full information, anything that has happened. And this continues to be a database that they can pull up and see if they saw an incident, if there was an IED, if there was a high-value target, whatever took place in that particular area, they can go back and look at each one of these and begin to get the database and scroll down and get that information. At the same point in time, with the VoIP client, they can continue to have the conversations. They can get on a chat room and begin to have discussions back and forth in terms of what did you see, what took place, this particular incident, you reported X, but what did it mean and what else did you find there? And so they can have these real-time communication capabilities as they use this tool. At the same point in time, they can use this to provide real-time collaboration. So in many cases, they're talking about this site. They're basically using their comms. They're getting back and beginning to use some of these tool sets to exchange that data. And again, this is happening not just within 2 locations or peer-to-peer. Anybody that's on CPOF at that point in time is able to see this because of the number of screens and what they want to view. So it depends upon if you want to be in on the particular discussion, if you want to see what's going on, all you got to do is tap. And all this information is being displayed on every particular type down to the company level. So today, companies in many cases have, if you will, battle command information that years ago was only at a core headquarters. That is what has changed here in terms of some of these capabilities. Use of the tactical graphics to essentially direct actions. So we begin to see here, we're talking about a formation trying to move in terms of what they're going to do to go after attack the targets. And all they're doing is trying to provide this information. This now becomes how we put out orders. How we put out orders to particular units in terms of what they're going to do. And again, back here to the real-time collaboration. Again, it just shows you can highlight a particular box here. You can begin to show every piece of information that's in there. Like I said, these are just a number of screenshots. I'd like to have shown you exactly what they're doing today. Obviously, for security purposes, I can't. But I think you can see from the standpoint of graphics, chat, the use of tools, how they can begin to identify particular targets. We now have a capability that everybody sees the same information anywhere throughout that entire battlefield, that battlefield formation, as well as all throughout the country. Okay, so let me talk about where we intend to go. Because now that we've had this success, we intend to begin to incorporate these Web 2.0 capabilities into our future battle command developments. So what you see right here is the battle command development. You've got map, collaboration in terms of chat. You basically have data mediation, imagery. These are the types of information that's required right now to do, if you will, battle command in the combat zone. And again, we're doing this over a very distributed network, and in many cases, is moving. I mean, it's not like you can access fiber everywhere you go. This is used to SATCOM. This is a lot of radio traffic, a lot of microwave capabilities in terms of trying to transmit this information. So we get to the point that we have these types of systems very loosely coupled and together, begin to put this into collaboration standards for maneuver, for air, how we intend to view this information, as well as other battle command systems. We have to make sure this goes back to everything we have in the current environment. Our current systems right now are not all Web 2.0 capable. Okay, the most advanced systems are, but as we go back to some of our legacy equipment, we've got to make sure that we build these out in terms of standards, in terms of bandwidth, in terms of whatever, to ensure that they can use it as well. Then we get to the point we start using RSS to notify us if there's any change in that environment. As opposed to someone going in and querying, I'd like to make sure I'm going into this area of operations. I need to kind of know what's going on. When something happens, all of a sudden there's a feed and information is published and sent out to anybody that needs it. At the same point in time, we're using keyhole markup language to access, in many cases, what the types of capabilities within Google Earth or other industry capabilities that we can begin to put in and use to the end till you get to a point where you've got a warfighter view that essentially is something that's been tailored to what their needs are, but we're beginning to use all the types of technology and capabilities that today you use in terms of your typical environment to advance what they have today and what their needs are. We talked a little bit about, if you will, the threat. Clearly, we have concerns all the time about threat. We've had, in many instances, where we've had host compromise. You go back to Fort Lewis or Fort Hood, Fort McPherson, Georgia, where computers, because they didn't keep patches up or they got malware on there, we've had to go in and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to go back and recreate some of those systems. So obviously, security is an issue. But in terms of this, I mean, the problem we begin to face with a lot of our soldiers, because they clearly are growing up as digital natives, they come in and they want to start using these computers to do some things on that computer, not recognizing potentially what the vulnerability might be. So they go into their Facebook, they got a YouTube link, pulls up an iframe and essentially says, okay, we're going to go ahead and update your flash reader here. And essentially what happens, it doesn't necessarily do it, puts you to another website, and then you get the malware located. And so we've had instances of this on a number of our systems that we've had to go back and try to recreate. In fact, you get to some of the data here, we went back and looked at a number of our machines and found out there were thousands of, if you will, different malicious unwanted programs on these computers. And oh, by the way, just in July, there was an increase into August of about 8,000. So I mean, this is just a subset of the data. But clearly, you know, the projections are right now that this is going to increase dramatically, exponentially. I know in terms of the way things are, I know when we had the discussion up there in New York with Tim, security is not a big issue yet for Web 2.0, but in terms of what the needs are from our standpoint, certainly in tactical environments, this is something we'd like to take advantage of more of these type of tools, but we have to confront this particular issue every day. Botnets. I don't think we'll spend much time going through this, but clearly from our standpoint, we're estimating that this continues to grow in terms of the needs. There was some data that we saw here that talked about there were like 100 million computers being used to send out malicious software and malware and so forth, and that this continues to increase. Is growing very quickly, obviously in many cases, just because of what we talked about there. I got an email some months ago from a major O. I don't know a major O from a major X, but I got this note from a major O. And it talked about there was an update for a future meeting, but it looked rather suspicious because I didn't recognize the email up there. Well, fortunately, I didn't do anything with that particular email, because had I done such, there was a bot attached to it, okay? And I wasn't the only one that was potentially targeted. There were about 14 or 15 different people in my organization that particular message was sent to. So these are something not only that are being, as I said, sent out to our soldiers, but even the senior leaders are getting this. And I will tell you there was one incident up in the OSD Secretariat, okay, where a particular file came in, and the attached Adobe PDF file was essentially talking about cyber in China. Everybody opened it up, and all the computers got infected. So they're pretty clever people. They're very clever people. as well as, in many cases, the use of these to do a number of things, not the least of which is the denial of service attacks. And I'm going to kind of show you just an example here of what I'm talking about. So here is what I consider to be the harbinger of the future. Here was Georgia, essentially a number of months ago. And what took place there was what happened before the kinetic attack was the non-kinetic attack. And essentially, what we're talking about here, this is what we see to be the future. Not only are you going to have kinetic attacks, but it's going to be cyber attacks. Just the example here. A lot of these attacks came through Turkey and Azerbaijan. Basically, they took down not only the government, but also their ability to function. And in many cases, all these fake sites. And so in the future, this is something we have to be concerned about from a military standpoint, because it's easy to do, it's very low cost, and if we don't have a network, I will tell you today, your Army will not be able to fight. And it's not just your Army, it's your Air Force, it's your Marines, it's your Navy, okay? So again, I appreciate coming out, and I know I'm at the limit here. I've talked a little bit about this, trying to figure out and show you what our needs are and what I think you need to be thinking about, because that's what the nation is going to be having to look at in the future. All those different trends. Talk a little bit about how we're trying to use this technology, but we always have this lag just because of our needs. And again, we're looking to industry to try to accelerate our capabilities, because in the end, it's all about giving situational awareness to those soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine. So again, I thank you for your attendance. Appreciate your if you will, listening to me today, and hopefully I've spurred some interest, and you'll see some need to help us in the future. So thank you very much.